Hi everyone, I just wanted to do a quick extra video just to take you through some of my thoughts and reflection and maybe a few of my experiences using these ideas of reflection of content, feeling and paraphrasing. Now, the idea of reflection of content and feeling, I like to think that it comes mainly from Carl Rogers and the humanistic experience. So his perspective was called person-centered approach, and it was called like that because the focus was shifting from the counselor as an expert onto the client as an expert. And the idea is that the counselor was simply there to listen, to create, again, join in and create an emotional bridge between the client and the counselor. One of the things that Carl Rogers talked a lot about is this idea of unconditional positive regard. And the idea of unconditional positive regard and acceptance can be really illustrated through this idea of reflection of content and feeling. So what Carl Rogers did, he seemed to be like a really, really lovely guy. And one of the things he did was not use a lot of questions. Actually, there's a few videos where he doesn't use questions at all. All he does is reflect, uses minimal responses and reflection. And that conveys a sense that you are implicitly accepting your client almost no matter what they say, almost no matter what they do. Of course, almost, because there are some exceptions to that. But by reflecting, we are telling the client, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, and this is me telling you that I understand you. And that's it. I'm not passing on judgment. I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying I'll accept you if. And all of that can be conveyed through this idea of reflection. Because we're withholding our assumptions, we're withholding our value judgment, our perception of what is okay, what is not okay, what the client should have done, shouldn't have done. It can be quite difficult to do, but it can be a really powerful technique. And it can be broken down into mainly reflection of feeling and content. But we can also talk about paraphrasing, and that's something that we included in the video as well. So the idea of paraphrasing, why it's so important, is because if we are parroting, if we're repeating everything that the client says, then almost loses the effectivity or the effectiveness. It won't be as powerful because we're just simply almost mimicking, almost repeating what the client is saying to us. However, if we are paraphrasing, it feels that we are involving, we're involved, fully immersed in the process of listening and understanding, and this is how we understood what the client said. And that is why it's really important to paraphrase, to give our own take on what the client is saying. But without passing any judgment or without, once more, adding our own perceptions to it. Now, in terms of reflection of feeling and content, it's one thing you have to keep in mind is that we are teaching separately reflection of feeling and content because it's perhaps a little bit easier to start practicing in that way. But in reality, it's a bit harder to separate feeling and content. And it's usually more often than not that they are all blended together. Not only when the client is opening up and talking about their experiences, they will be blending feeling and content, but also the counselor is more likely to reflect both feeling and content. However, I would encourage you to start looking at these separately. Start looking at content on the one hand and feeling on the other hand. And when you start practicing with friends, family, or peers, classmates, I would suggest do the same thing. Focus exclusively on reflecting feelings, focus exclusively on reflecting content. That will help you understand a little bit better, or being able to focus a little bit better on what is that you are reflecting. And like we mentioned in the video, reflection of content can be really powerful because you are reflecting back, you are showing that you're listening to the client based on the content. However, reflection of feeling can be particularly powerful because when we talk about our feelings, then there's inevitably an emotional state attached to it. And acknowledging or being confronted, almost, being seeing the feelings that you are putting out there reflected back and almost in your face, it can be quite powerful. Yes. Sometimes that's enough to help our clients lower the defenses and become more trustworthy, become more trusting of the process, the therapeutic process, and open up and make progress, quicker. So let me give you a bit of my experience or my take on reflection of feeling and content. So I used to see a client last year, 10-year-old boy, who was showing mainly the referral reason was not so much about emotional dysregulation or anything like that. It was more around inattention and being disruptive in class. But what normally happens with kids in session, or at least in my experience, is that most clients won't really know why they're being sent to counseling. And while they may see the value, perhaps they may not have, if they were given the choice, they may not have chosen to see a counselor at that stage in their lives, because they may not perceive that they have something to address. So because of that dynamic, sometimes what I find myself doing is trying to find those directions, trying to directly address those issues, almost poking something, almost trying deliberately to go for a specific issue, which is almost the opposite of what I was just talking about in terms of Carl Rogers and the humanistic perspective, where from a humanistic perspective, the counselor will take a step back and allow the client to decide where the session goes and what are the issues that are going to be explored in sessions. So I was seeing myself a little bit conflicted, because I am aware and perhaps I identify myself with the Rogerian perspective and a human-centered perspective. A person-centered perspective. But on the other hand, because of what I was saying, working with kids that maybe don't even see that there are any issues for them to address, maybe there are no problems they want to bring to therapy, so it can make things a little bit trickier. However, I came across this book called Deep in Search for Self, written by Virginia Axline. And she developed this idea of play therapy. And she allows the kids to explore their own issues through using the toys and tools and whatever she's got available in that therapeutic room. So in this book, Deep in Search for Self, Virginia Axline narrates her therapeutic journey with one client who perhaps didn't think had any issues. And basically what she does is takes not only one step back, but a few steps back. And all she does throughout the book is reflects. She just reflects, does reflection of feeling, reflection of content. And if you access the book, it's not expensive, you can find it, maybe you can even find it online. I'll definitely recommend going through that book, and you will see that all she does is reflect. And so I thought, well, maybe that's something I need to implement in my own practice, particularly with this client I was telling you before. Because I felt that sometimes when I was pushing a little bit too much, the client will lift his barriers and almost be closed off. So it wasn't really a good dynamic. It was almost me interrogating the client, and it wasn't really working. So I thought, take a step back and engage only in reflection, or mostly in reflection, borrowing Virginia Axeline's technique and Carl Rogers' techniques as well. And long story short, the client loved that dynamic. I was very hard trying to focus only on reflection. And he started opening up, he started discussing things that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to discuss in sessions if I was pressing or I was trying to pursue a certain issue because I thought it was important. And I must admit, it was quite difficult to refrain from asking questions, to refrain from adding my own value judgment, to refrain from pursuing a certain thing that the client may say that I thought it was interesting and I was curious about. Perhaps I thought that could take us somewhere. But only I guess only allowing myself to just reflect, it was quite difficult to do, quite hard to do, but very effective. So what I would say is perhaps get your hands on some of the resources we're making available on Canvas, because then you'll see some examples of, a few more examples of how reflection of content and feeling and paraphrasing, could look like. There are also some exercises, and what I would say is practice. Use those exercises and maybe see what, sometimes you'll have a script and they will ask you to fill in the blanks and whatnot. See what your thought process is in relation to the answers that you're provided, but also go out there and practice out in the community with friends, family, peers. Practice as much as you can, because that's what's going to give you that confidence in testing these techniques and then knowing that they work. Because as counselors, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we need to be confident in the process. I remember when I started getting to the counseling role, I was aware of all the techniques and the theories, or some of the techniques and theories, but there was something in me thinking, I'm not sure if talk therapy is going to be as effective as people say. But quickly I understood, quickly I realized that it is quite effective. It can be really powerful. So that confidence in the process and knowing that the work does pay off can be really helpful, can be really useful in the therapeutic relationship, but only comes with the experience of having done it and knowing that it works. And that is why I'm saying practice is really important, because maybe if you're practicing with, a classmate who knows is doing the same course as you and knows about reflection of feeling, and you're reflecting the feeling, it may not be as powerful because they are aware of what's happening. But if you do it with someone, if you practice or use these techniques with someone who may not be aware of these techniques right now, I bet it will be really, really powerful. And of course, the real counseling setting, we already talked about this, the real counseling setting will never be the same as practicing. However, practicing will make a difference, will help you gain that confidence, will help you become more natural at using these techniques and being able to reflect without asking questions, without passing on judgment, without providing advice. Try it and you'll see how hard it is. But again, it can be really powerful. All it takes is practice. And that's my, I guess, humble advice to you. Practice as much as you can and just to see the value of it. So that's all I wanted to share with you today in this short video. I hope you are taking something out of this. And once more, if you got any queries, any thoughts, any stories you want to share, either with me or with your tutor, feel 100% free to do so.